Welcome back to another episode of Christian Natural Health. Today, I'm very pleased to have Jake Weidmann with us. Jake is a professional artist and is certified as only one of 9 Master Penmen in the world. He holds the title as the youngest Master Penman by 3 decades and is the youngest to ever attain the title. A few of Jake's peers, other masters, have done work for the White House, Queen Elizabeth, and even the Pope. His journey into calligraphy has been the special sauce for everything that he creates, incorporating the traditional calligraphic flourishes into his fine art. And while he typically works with private clients, he's worked with Apple, Crossway Books, Biola University, and has spoken from countless stages, including Tedx Q, and was featured on PBS Television. He's the author of Old Soul, New Creation, Experiencing God Through a Life of Art and Faith. Welcome, Jake. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. I really enjoy being here.
Yeah, for sure. So first, tell us what a master penman is. I had not even heard of it. So what's the
Yes. Well, the term Master Penman always bears some level of explanation. It's not exactly the top career choice of 2025,
right,
but there's always next year.
right. Yeah, of course.
but
Hmm.
but essentially, the term penman actually it's a term from antiquity going back to the golden age of penmanship, which
Hmm.
was really from about the end of the Civil War, end of the American Civil War up until about the 1930s. And
Hmm.
back during that time, you could go get your degree as a penman. There were several different business colleges and art colleges that were set up with those kinds of degree programs,
Hmm.
because a lot of different businesses at the time needed someone in their employ who could keep the books or do certificate work and knew how to use the pen and write legibly.
Hmm.
And so the ones who kind of went above and beyond that, the ones who were able to go far beyond what the programs regularly designated, were regarded as master penmen.
Hmm.
And these are the ones that were just kind of pushing the envelope as far as what you could do with a pen. You know, there were certain characters like F.B. Courtney, who was regarded as the pen wizard,
Hmm.
because he could write with both hands at the same time. He was
Wow.
ambidextrous. Yeah, or the king of penmen was Louis Madaraz, and he developed the serif script, which is what you see in like the Coca-Cola logo today. And
Hmm.
so they
Oh,
really
wow.
laid the foundation, and it's permeated our world.
Right.
Though we like have very little knowledge anymore of that kind of history.
Right.
So there's a small association that's been keeping the art of penmanship alive and the tradition of master penman. And so it was back in 2011 that I got my certificate as a master penman.
That's fantastic. So, how does this kind of intersect with the way that you understand God as creator and how you see like you're made in his image as a creator? Does that like kind of, is that part of the way that you think about it from a spiritual standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it all goes pen in hand,
Yeah.
um, in that in that my faith is the driving force to every art form that I put my hand to.
Mhm.
It is the thing that motivates me. It's the thing that draws me in.
Mhm.
My first language of worship, if you will, and so it's always been the way that I've encountered God, and though it was something that in in worldly terms, becoming an artist is no easy thing.
Right.
All stereotypes begin somewhere, and there is such a thing called a starving artist. And
Sure.
and certainly, like when you get something that is as well unique, shall we say, and anachronistic in its term as Master Penman, it's bound to be an uphill battle. And so I thought, this was always going to be something I would do as a side passion,
Right.
but sort of put it off. And so, in a lot of ways, I kind of denied the very thing that God had gifted to me,
Mhm.
and so there was a lot of kind of lack of faith in that regard.
Mhm.
But but God is but God always used it to like kind of grow me into my vocation and grow me into my calling by
Mhm.
using what I had most immediately at hand. because I
Mhm.
had always grown up loving art, doing art as a kid,
Yeah.
and so it was just it was like something that was always there, just a constant friend.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more about your story of struggling against what you wanted, like what you were passionate about? Because I am assuming, based on your implication, that it was because the road isn't paved and it's hard to make a career out of this. And so you were trying to go a different route and God just kept bringing you back. I feel like there's a lot of listeners who are looking for, what they were placed on this earth to do and maybe aren't listening to some of the leading of the Holy Spirit. What was
Yeah.
the journey like for you?
I mean, I opened up my book with that, where I talk about, C.S. Lewis called himself the most reluctant convert,
Uh-huh.
because he always pushed against the faith that he would ultimately
Yeah,
claim, love, and defend.
right.
But then, in my case, I call myself the most reluctant creative,
Mm.
because like even from a small age, I thought, I was like, I wanted to be a cowboy, so I would draw pictures of horses
Yeah.
obsessively, and
Right.
then I thought I'd follow in my father's footsteps and go to the Air Force Academy and fly airplanes. And so I used to draw airplanes, at no end, even including my parents somehow allowed me to paint a huge mural on my bedroom wall of a C-130 like flying into the room.
Wow,
And
that's must have been cool.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was fun, and I think I did it when I was like 12,
Yeah,
so got plenty of like paint splatter on the carpet. But my
sure.
parents were very, very supportive.
They were cool
And
about
then,
it, but yeah.
yeah, and then it's like that dream faded away, and so then I thought, as I grew up and graduated high school, psychology really appealed to me. I loved the inner workings of relationship. I was fascinated by the way that the mind works, um, and so I pursued psychology as a degree at
Mhm.
Biola University,
Yeah.
and I thought, the way that I would keep my passion for art alive is, I'll specialize. I'll get my degree as an art therapist,
Uh-huh.
and that'll sort of be a way, because art therapy um, is a very powerful tool, especially working with kids,
Mhm.
which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a developmental psychologist,
Mhm.
and working with kids who have the trouble like articulating some of those abstract ideas like thoughts and feelings.
Mhm.
Being able to draw things out is actually a way to really get to the inner workings of their small psyche, and that helps not only in the diagnostic process but in the therapeutic process as well.
Yeah.
And so I thought that that was going to be the direction of my career, and you know what? It just it didn't happen. It was like I graduated from college. I had this shiny new bachelor's degree,
Mhm.
which I graduated in 2008. So it was the middle of the
Yeah.
economic
Oh,
recession,
yeah, like worst time.
and yeah. So I was like, the only jobs that were open to me in my field of study were basically like social work, and
Mhm.
so, but I kept getting commissions for these different like art projects, and I would, at that time I would say yes to everything. I had school
Sure.
loans, and
Yeah,
I
right.
was I was trying to build this pseudo career in art just to kind of make ends meet.
Bye.
And
Yeah.
so I was doing everything from painting murals to addressing wedding envelopes,
Mhm.
and just it. I was very, very young and scrappy at that time, but then it just so I say like it's a career that and a calling that chose me
Mhm.
after I had long denied it.
Right.
And so eventually I was brought before some really amazing businessmen who said, Jake, you have an unbelievable talent here,
Mhm.
and you just need structure around you. You need there to be this infrastructure to undergird you so
Mhm.
that you can go on doing what the Lord has called you to do. And that was amazing. I mean, that was
Mhm.
to have serious men take me seriously,
Yeah.
was a huge vote of confidence, and so finally at that point I stopped denying
Yeah.
the my calling into art and just dove into it headlong.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you mentioned that this is part of how you find God, what when you're doing the work. And what pops into my head was I feel like it was from Chariots of Fire where Eric, the main character, says that when he runs,
Yes,
he feels God's pleasure. And that's kind of what
absolutely.
it sounds like what you're describing. Can you explain like how is this an act of worship to you?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, gosh, I don't know how long we actually have on here because this is, I mean, it would take,
Yeah.
you're talking about the majority of my life. That's where I've I've most intimately encountered the Spirit.
Mhm.
Um, because it's one thing to go to church and be to be enthralled by a good sermon or participate in um, that sort of collective worship, praise and worship time, or even climb a mountain and see God's glory. But I find Him in the intimate, in the most intimate ways when I'm at work. It's like He shows up in just these unbelievable ways,
Mhm.
and where um, he speaks through what I'm doing, or he'll, it's like I'll get to a point where it's like I've exhausted my talent, I've exhausted my skill, and I'm in way over my depths on some art piece,
Yeah.
that I've tried to do, and then
Mhm.
um, somehow it's like God makes makes a way. Like, for instance, there was this calligraphic piece that I was doing, and it's Isaiah. It was the verse Isaiah 53, 4 and 5.
Mhm.
And this will be a challenge to describe just orally, but essentially the verse, I wrote the verse as in the shape of the crown of thorns. And
Mhm.
the verse is one continuous line of script that goes around itself twice. It intersects itself 10 times as weaving like the vine of thorns that it
Yeah.
is,
Right.
and the ascenders and descenders of the letter, like where the D rises up and where the
Yeah.
Y falls below,
Yeah.
those created the thorns of the crown of thorns. And when you do a calligraphic work, even working strictly left to right, top to bottom,
Right.
on the page, it usually takes 3 or 4 times to lay it out and get the spacing
Mhm.
perfect.
Yeah.
And I wrote this piece and expecting to do it 3 or 4 times to get the spacing right, and
Mhm.
it landed perfectly
Love it.
right where it had begun.
Yeah.
And there were always line breaks, and so it was one of those moments where it was like I knew that there was a power at work beyond my
Right.
skill, because I
Sure.
never could have done that.
Right.
And so I had like tears in my eyes at the moment, and I
Yeah.
slowly like pushed myself back from the table,
Right.
because it was just I knew that I was on holy ground. And so there's thousands upon thousands of moments like that where
Mhm.
it's like God draws me in to the beauty of His creation. And sometimes there is a deep, like, Christian message that the whole piece is themed around, and sometimes it isn't. It exists in that more middle space, where that is called common grace.
Mhm.
That all beauty is God's beauty, and just as all truth is God's truth, and He calls that back into Himself.
Yep.
And so I am swept up in that as I'm drawn into relationship with my Father.
Yeah, I love it. So, the as you were talking, the verse, I'd never thought of it in this way exactly before, but the verse that says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. This idea of any kind of work becomes sacred if you are doing it as unto Him. And it sounds
Yes.
like you're very intentionally choosing to dedicate the work that you do to Him on a regular basis. So
Mm,
what
absolutely.
advice, yeah, what advice would you have for the listeners who maybe, I mean, this is certainly an example of a way that people can do this creatively, but Do you feel like everybody should pursue some sort of a creative endeavor so that they can do this kind of a thing? Or is there a way that you think that anybody in any kind of a job could, enter into this meditative place by a choice? What kind of advice would you give to our listeners who want to experience that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is um it's become one of my life messages,
Yeah.
is that, everyone is creative. You
Hmm.
may not be artistic,
Hmm.
you may not have good handwriting.
Yeah.
I
Right.
look at my own father, and his handwriting would make a chicken blush. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's that bad,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of explaining I've had to do to my fellow Master Penman about the pedigree from which I come, but
Right.
but he's one of the most creative men I know.
Yeah.
And he's just, in the way that he actually involves that in his own life, and even in our upbringing, the way that he used to engage with us and teach us God's word. It was never, in this simple, direct way, chicken soup for the soul, reading through a devotion every night. He always came up with some unbelievable creative way of expressing that. And
Hmm.
so I think, I've been blessed to see and to recognize the creative capacity that's at work in everyone. And so yeah, I am an artist, and you can see that play out very directly. But an artist works, in this case, and in the case of the book,
Hmm.
as essentially like a good archetype for creativity.
Hmm.
And I often quote G.K. Chesterton's "Everlasting Man." He was talking about the earliest caveman, and he took to task the anthropologists of his day, who painted the caveman as just a simple brute. He says, "Well, we don't have any of their clubs lying around to really paint them as a brute, but what we do have are paintings on cave walls." So
Hmm.
the only thing that you can conclude, therefore, is that the caveman was an artist. Dig far enough down in the earth, and there you will find that man has drawn a picture of a reindeer. But
Hmm.
no matter how deep you dig, you will never find that a reindeer has drawn a picture of a man.
Yeah.
For art is the signature of man.
Yeah.
And so it was just a really powerful statement. And so yes, the artist is the archetype for that same kind of human ingenuity that runs through us all. And
Hmm.
it'll probably manifest itself in a million different ways through time out of memory.
Hmm.
But God has put in you this creative capacity. And
Hmm.
I believe it is one of the quickest ways into relationship with him,
Hmm.
because it is one of the greatest marks of the image of God, the imago Dei in us.
Hmm. So, for somebody who's listening and thinking, okay, they're not necessarily artistic, and does this mean they should cultivate a hobby? Like practically speaking, like you gave the example of your father being a very creative man because he came up with unique ways to convey the scripture. Can you give us some other examples of people who aren't like classically artistic demonstrating their creative capabilities?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can see this. I mean, if you're creating anything,
Hmm.
that same level uh, of human ingenuity is at work in you.
Hmm.
So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're building a business, um, if you're a doctor who's having to, approach somebody with an illness, you have to, in that sense, create a cure. Yes, there's lots of things that you follow, just as I follow, the strokes of past masters in my work, but I put it to work, to create something new. And
Right.
that kind of points to the title of the book,
Yeah.
is like,
Right.
we rely, there is an element of the old soul in all of us.
Hmm.
We all rely on the information and age, and the wisdom of ages past. And we should. That is a good and right thing to do. You
Hmm.
know, C.S. Lewis says, it's sort of an old idea had by young people that every generation by default is automatically smarter than the generation that came before it. And
Hmm.
he called this chronological snobbery, which I think is just
That's great. I like
brilliant.
this, Lewis.
And so, it's the so you don't reject the past. It's like you take all of those, all that the past has given you, and you build upon it. And that is, I mean, that is the root of the Christian faith. That is how we walk in our faith tradition, but at the same time being made a new creation as we interact with the Holy Spirit on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
So so it could, whatever that capacity is alive in you, it's like it could look like anything. You could
Right.
be, even if it's you're a DIYer, if you're building a family, if you're creating a structure, you're building something. And
Right.
especially in this day and age where it's so easy to consume and there is so much to consume, it's it's really important that we not neglect our responsibility as co-creators with God.
Yeah. And so I'm sure that, especially in your world, there's been a lot of buzz about how AI is changing the landscape. And now there's all this digital art that is easily available. So I've have other artist friends that are a little bit appalled and frightened by the possibilities. It's
Sure.
what would you, it doesn't sound like this scares you or bothers you in particular, at least as far as I can tell. What's your take on that? How it's going to change the future of art and creation in general, or is it?
um I think you're right that I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah.
Because I believe enough in uh, the ingrained love for creativity that God has placed in the human soul,
Yeah.
that it's like we're not going to leave that up to computers. We couldn't help but do otherwise.
Right.
I mean, I think there is, if you have a propensity towards um, if you have a propensity towards laziness or just wanting to rush to the end and get to the final result,
Right.
then you might be more you might more easily fall into that trap of
Yeah.
what it means to like actually use AI and abdicate your creative capability to a machine.
Right. Hmm.
But it's like, and there are some artists today that are, they call themselves AI artists, and essentially they're putting prompts to the engine and having them generate art. And I say, like, you've just proven that you don't actually like being an artist, because
Yeah.
it's not just about the end itself. And you also, it's like, you want, as an artist, it's like, when I sit down with a client, for instance, I'm taking in information from them, and I'm going to distill it in my own creativity and
Mhm.
manifest something that is completely new and
Right.
completely unique in the world.
Right.
So I think that it will separate um, sort of the men from the boys when it comes
Sure.
to who is like a true creative.
Right.
um and I also see that there's going to be sort of an inflationary aspect to to artificially created artwork. So
Yeah.
because it's like there will be so much of it produced and so quickly, so that it's like it's actually going to drive up the value of something that
Is
is
real.
that is done by hand, that is done analog, and people will be drawn all the more to it.
Hmm. I think that's true. And I can't entirely put my finger on why yet. There's something called the uncanny valley, which is, where something approximates human features, but it's not quite
Right.
there, and something feels a little off about it. And so
Yep.
I see images that are created by AI, at least at this point, it's still in the uncanny valley, and I still know. And there's something
Yeah.
marginally creepy about it. And
Yep.
maybe it will get closer and closer, but I don't know. So there's something about that that's like viscerally, I don't know, that I kind of shy away from. And I think that might be something that is common for most people. But I also, at least my understanding of the way that AI works, is that I suppose there's a debate about what is creativity, but
Mm,
think that largely with respect to what they are capable of doing, it might seem creative, but it's just pattern recognition and synthesizing and putting it all together in something that's almost an amalgamation as opposed to a completely new creation. What's your thought on what is like, is it even possible for a machine to have true creativity?
mm. Uh, no.
Okay, okay.
I think it's a simulation thereof.
Yeah.
So it's like you look at it and they've already there's actually massive lawsuits right now
Mhm.
um, where it's like you can prove that AI, a lot of these like image models are stealing portions of different pictures and piecing them together. So what we may have created is not so much an artificially intelligent artist, but we what we may have created is one of the greatest automated
Yes.
thefts of IP in human history.
Yeah.
And so it's like, because it's just taking it and it's recycling it, and you can actually find pieces apart. So I know there's some massive lawsuits going on right now, but
It's
so I
stressful.
think there is a question to like what is actual um, creativity, but I think there's another question behind that is what do we value
Mhm.
in true creativity?
Mhm.
Because it's like if we just value the image itself, then we should be happy with whatever
Right.
our computer can spit out in a
Right.
moment. But what we actually value is that it is the work of is the person behind the work of genius.
Mhm.
um, I ran into an art critic recently, and he he started kind of ripping on the Mona Lisa. And he's like, who really cares about the Mona Lisa? He's like, I've seen it and I wasn't that impressed with it, and I was like, oh, really? The Mona Lisa? And so and it's like, yeah, some people look at it and they think like it's just a simple woman with no eyebrows, but it's the what is valued about it is it does represent a change in a time and period of art history, in the way that portraits were being captured. There's some element of that, but more importantly is it speaks to the man of genius that created it.
Mhm.
And it was rumored that that was the last painting that he ever parted with. And at that point, Da Vinci had suffered a really bad stroke, and he had lost his ability to paint at that time. So I'm sure he was looking at this one painting as, the example of the height of his skill and being willing to part with it. And so it's like there is so much more story, there's so much more depth,
Sure.
even to, that simple but profound portrait. And then there's a story too of how humanity has interacted with that portrait and given it its notoriety to the point that it becomes like an icon in the human vernacular
Mhm.
worldwide. And
Mhm.
so it's like I think that is the thing that as AI rolls out and as all of these conversations are had, my hope is that it gives us, for those of us who are willing to step in and to have a solid conversation about it, it gives us a deeper understanding about what we value
Mhm.
um, about human creativity
Mhm.
overall.
Yeah. So, and it's as you say, it's the overall story and the meaning and the context of the piece that's created. But you are kind of alluding also to the value for the creator in the process. And I almost feel like that's part of what makes the whole concept behind, meditation and being in the moment is to
Mm,
not skip the day to day, not skip
yeah.
process of getting from where you need to get. Have you ever read the book Flow? It's Mihaly.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I can't pronounce his last name. It's like a C with
Nobody can. Yeah.
yeah, right. But that's what I was thinking about as you were describing that, that there's something most, I don't know if about most, but I think most people would say that some of the happiest times of their lives or the most profound moments of their lives are when they're in this state of flow, which is where time, expands and you are so into what you're doing that
Yeah.
hours can pass by in moments because
Mhm.
and it's like you forget that you exist. I'm assuming that's what you experience all the time when you're drawing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then, um, elevate that
Mhm.
to the level of prayer
Right. Yeah.
when you invite that spiritual element into it.
Mhm.
I think everybody experiences, and that's, and one more level of sort of that common grace is experiencing that creative flow. But
Right.
you want to up the ante all the more,
Yeah.
invite God into your work, you
Man,
know?
absolutely. Yeah.
And you will be absolutely blown away by the ways that he will meet you there.
Right.
And to ask boldly, for instance, we're recording this
Yeah.
podcast on Good Friday, and there was Good Friday in 2022, and I was commissioned to create the hymn The Old Rugged Cross.
Mhm.
And so, and I wanted to not only do it as a two-dimensional like illumination work, but I actually wanted to set it into a full-size cross and then like carve this whole frame around it and everything
Oh,
else.
wow.
We actually created a beautiful video set with the song that sings it and just chronicles the whole process.
Oh my
But
goodness.
the wood, I prayed on Good Friday. I was like, Lord, I am looking for specifically like I need aged lumber. I wanted black walnut. That was like the
Yeah.
ideal, is I wanted it to look dark and really powerful, but to have natural age so that
Right.
it had more story. And
Yeah.
it wasn't going to be 2,000 years old, but
Sure. Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
would be great. So I had searched all over trying to find like beams of like reclaimed lumber in
Hmm.
Old Walnut. And
Yeah.
I found like one lumber yard that I drove to the morning of Good Friday. And I went there, and there was the entire lumber yard. It was bay after bay of cherry,
Yeah.
hickory, um, uh, heart pine. And, I couldn't find anything. There were two, and eventually I talked to the owner. He finally came out from his like dusty shop,
Hmm.
and he says, I think I might have some lying around here.
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, we go into one of the bays,
Hmm.
and there were two pieces
Oh
of
my God.
black walnut that was like basically just as long as I needed, beautifully
Oh,
aged, and they had come from an Amish barn from the 1840s.
what? Oh,
Yeah.
see, and
And
that was
so,
just because you asked God for it, and
yeah,
I love
it
it.
was amazing. And it was like and I remember like the day, like I lift up this massive beam and I put it on my shoulder, and I start crying on my way to the truck. And like
Uh,
the lumber guy, the lumberyard worker who was there, his name is Mike. And he was like, hey, you okay? Did you pull your back or something? I was like, no. And I showed him the sketch. Like I pulled up the sketch on my phone of what it was for and told him the whole story. Well, he's another big burly guy. He starts crying, and he's like, that's just
oh,
amazing. He goes, the fact that I would only have two pieces.
yeah,
And it's stories like that that are so, I've repeated them so many times, and I'm like, did it actually happen that way? Was
yeah,
that right? And what was amazing, on the day of my book release, I got a text from Mike. He actually had held on to my number,
yeah.
and he said he had gotten my book, and he said, I'm so glad our story made it into your book, because he
Oh,
says he goes, someday I'll have to tell you how that day was different for me than any other. And so it was like, I was in tears again, just because it was a confirmation to the one other person
yeah.
that bared witness to the provision of God when I stepped out in faith and
Hmm.
stepped into the creative process, and there he met me. And
Hmm.
so I think he's beckoning us for that. He wants, he's a good father who wants to give good gifts to his children,
Right.
and
Yeah.
especially when we engage with him. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like you experience those things a few times, and you always want to get back to that place.
Right.
And then, whatever it is, whatever, work becomes prayer. There's a great
Right.
old Latin phrase for that. It's laborare estorare. To work is to pray. And so it doesn't matter that whatever you put your hands to, whether you're washing the dishes, or changing your baby's diaper, and we do a lot of that around here with
Mhm.
with 4 kids, and another one due imminently.
Yeah.
um there's holiness in every moment, and if you're just willing to step into it.
Absolutely. And so I think the idea of not fearing the tide of AI comes from that attitude of where Jesus essentially said, don't worry about all these details that you're going to need to live your life. Seek first the kingdom of God, and he's going to add it all to you. No matter what you're doing,
Yes.
first the kingdom of God, and just don't worry about the rest. He knows what you need. He'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Be fine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
So, what have I not asked you that you want to make sure you leave with our audience?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I don't know. I think I I've talked at length. probably
We got it. All
probably
right.
probably giving your readers a lot to chew on. But I would just I would really encourage them. The writing the book was a really special experience, and I've created plenty of pieces to hang on walls, but this is something that you can hold in your hands,
Yeah.
and really to have the message tied so directly and explicitly to the images that back it up was
Mm.
such a unique experience, and one that is really intended for you to have and to engage with. Even the cover that I drew, and all the different treatments, it has a very tactile feel that's meant to lead you into this journey. And so yeah, it's a real gift. And we're just in the first week of its release, and already just hearing back from people and how it's affected them has been so special. So yeah, I would just encourage them to pick up the book, not just hear
Yeah.
about it, but it was intended to be held. And
Mm.
in our digital age,
Right.
to have an embodied experience
Hmm.
with the arts is something that is still incredibly profound.
Hmm.
And so I guess I would leave your readers with that, or your
Yeah.
listeners with
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. And so, where can people go to pick up a copy of your book?
Yeah, it is sold on Amazon, or pretty much anywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
So you can find it there. And then if you want to follow along with the rest of my work, you
Hmm.
can go to jakeweidmann.com.
Hmm.
Weidmann is spelled Weidmann. And from there, there are links to all of our different social media channels,
Hmm.
as well as the other business that I launched with my wife several years ago. The story of that is also in the book, but
Yeah.
it's called everydayheirloomco.com, where we get to adorn the beloved with these promises of God distilled into beautiful jewelry pieces.
Oh,
So all that is there and more.
very cool. Awesome. Well, I will link to that in the show notes. And thanks, Jake. This has been really inspiring. Really appreciate it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you, Lauren. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.